It was this social media post that caught our attention and caught the attention of the entire community. A man who found his son after looking for more than 20 years. This is a man many of us know personally. Burt Rosen, who is the CEO of Knox Area Rescue Ministries, for years had devoted his life because of his missing son to helping others without a home. How did he find his son? We wanted to know, and that's why we sat down with him. I want to start with this. Hope realized we found our missing son. What was it like to write those words?
Incredible. You hope for things and you're never sure when they're going to be realized. And so I think Carolyn and I always believed that we would find Matthew. We just didn't know when. And so we've been hoping all of these years that we would find him. And then all of a sudden you have that moment when you realize the thing that you've been waiting for almost 25 years is about to happen. And it did on the ground. And it was just an incredible moment. But that's what it was. It was realizing that which we had hoped for, that's what we had prayed for, that which we had asked God for, finally came through.
Let's go back to that day. We'll talk at length about how you got there, but let's just go to the day.
Okay.
You're in a car with your bride, and tell me just a little bit about those circumstances.
Okay, so it was Carolyn, myself, and our two daughters. We're the ones who ended up making the trip. And so we had just left the hotel, and it's really two long straight strips that take you to where he was living. And if you were to look at the aerial view of where he was living, it would look like this large plot of land with maybe some small cabins but spread out on the land as best we could tell. And you need to make a left-hand turn off of that main street that goes right by the University of Alaska. And that's where we were headed, fully intending on knocking on his front door, not knowing how he would respond, never fearing at all, but hey, you're knocking on the door of someone you haven't seen in 25 years. What's that going to be like? And so as we're driving down this long strip, it's about a 3.5 mile road, you turn left onto Chili Pepper. And there's about 8, 9, maybe 10 mailboxes that are along the street where the post office just deliver everybody's mail, and then everybody who lives back in there has to walk out to the mailbox to get their mail. So we've now started our left-hand turn, and we see someone walking towards the mailbox. And our daughter Rebecca shouts out, "That's Matthew. I'd know him anywhere." Well, we quickly completed our turn and made the U-turn, so now we're facing back towards where Matthew is standing. Carolyn yells out, "Matthew!" And then we all get out of the car. And we're now maybe 10 feet from him. And I said, "Matthew?" And he said, "Yeah," almost like, "Yeah, like who's asking," kind of a thing. And I said, "It's me, your dad." The girls and I went up to Matthew and we said, "Can we give you a hug?" And he said, "Yeah." Now, the three of us and Matthew are hugging, so there's 4 of us there. Carolyn got out of the car when we did, but she didn't come up to join us. It was almost as if she was frozen in the moment. And our daughter Rebecca kept saying, "Mom, like come on up." Carolyn wasn't moving. She wasn't speaking. This was the moment she had waited for almost 25 years, and she couldn't move. So Matthew, after hugging us and we're having our own little hug fest and weeping session, he left us and he went over to Carolyn, wrapped his arm around her, and then all you heard for the next 10 minutes was this profuse weeping. For so many years, because of the circumstances surrounding Matthew's actual leaving home, Carolyn's blamed herself for all of this. Now they're melting in each other's arms. And the crying just continues. And you could tell that Carolyn was whispering something to Matthew, but none of us could hear what that was. And after what seemed like an eternity passed, he said, "All right, so you want to come back to my place?" That was like the moment. And so our girls walked with Matthew the 3/4 of a mile or so back to his cabin. Carolyn and I followed along in the car, and we got to his cabin. We got out and we all went inside his cabin, and we spent the rest of the day together.
Pinching yourselves.
Yeah. Pinching ourselves, talking with one another, a little bit of reminiscing, asking some questions of each other. And, because the underlying question is, why haven't we heard from you? But on this day, it was really just catching up. And we told him how we've been looking for him all of these years, how we had made a provision in our estate plans so that in the event that we did not find him by the time we had passed, any money that would be there would be left in his brother's care, Matthew's younger brother's care, to be given to Matthew if and when he was ever found. And we put a sunset date on it so that if Matthew was never found, that money would then go somewhere else. But that's how we spent the entire day. And what was so surprising in seeing Matthew is when we last saw him, he was a bit disheveled. There was a darkness in his eyes. And you can look at someone and see whether there's light or whether there's darkness there. And he had been previously diagnosed with a bipolar disorder. This was way back when. None of that was there. He was neatly dressed. There was light in his eyes. And several times during the day, these spontaneous moments would occur where he would look over to his Rebecca, that's the younger of the two girls, and say, "Gosh, you're pretty." And he would just go over and give her a hug. And then there was another moment with me after I had completed sharing with him some of the things that we have been going through all these years and what we had done to let him know that we've never forgotten him and made a provision for him. He just came over while I was sitting on his sofa and just bear hugged me. And he just didn't want to let go. And then I just started sobbing. And so that's how we spent the entire day together, finally went to dinner together that night, and eventually brought him back to his cabin for the evening. And what he wanted to know is, I'm going to see you tomorrow, right? He was so glad we were there. You could tell he was just thrilled to be found. And in his mind, he wasn't lost, but he was thrilled to be found.
Again, before we go further, it's worth noting we have followed the Rosen story for years. 17 years ago, then reporter Yvette Martinez spoke with Burt and Carolyn, and they opened up about Matthew. Here is that story from 2008.
He was asking the college for a tuition reimbursement, and his basis was that he was paying for a quality education. He wasn't getting the quality of education that he wanted, and he wanted a refund.
Matthew Rosen was attending Virginia Tech when his father, Burt, realized his son's mental health was taking a dramatic turn for the worst.
That was the beginning of what would really be a rocky road, because the son who came home wasn't the son that went away.
A school psychiatrist diagnosed Matthew as bipolar. He dropped out of Virginia Tech and went home to his family in Pittsburgh.
But the son who came into the house was verbally abusive to Carolyn, was verbally abusive to the other kids as well.
Burt and Carolyn Rosen had a tough ultimatum for Matthew: get mental help or leave.
If you could just picture this scene with Carolyn and I staring out the storm door from our home in Pittsburgh, watching Matthew walk down the street with his rollerboard suitcase, we were just sobbing our eyes out.
To their surprise, their son enrolled in Duquesne University and made it to graduation day.
I made my way down towards the stage with the video camera and the other cameras, and we're snapping pictures. And that night we all went out to dinner as a family, and we're congratulating Matthew for having graduated.
For a short time, the Rosens thought Matthew was on track, but they were wrong.
What we later learned was that somehow his behavior on campus had intimidated people enough to where they were afraid if they did not allow him to walk across the stage, that he was going to disrupt the graduation ceremony.
Matthew's journey took him to jail, then to the streets of New York, where his dad miraculously found him. But after a brief visit, Matthew was back on the streets until he heard about his mom's near-fatal car accident.
We had one more call from him. He did come back through Pittsburgh again, and then eventually disappeared.
Carolyn says Matthew's brief stay was tense and even scary at times.
I asked Burt to ask him to leave, and that was the last time we saw him.
It was shortly after this heartbreaking event that Burt got a call from KARM.
And they asked if we would be interested in coming to Knoxville to run a homeless shelter. And the answer was a flat-out no.
The Rosens didn't feel qualified to help others get off the streets.
And our simple prayer was, God, help us to see with your eyes, help us to hear with your ears, and help us to feel with your heart.
And we had talked about it and discussed it, even though we didn't want to work with homeless people because of our son. We were so willing to do whatever it was that God wanted us to do.
KARM offered Burt the job, challenging the Rosens to leave their work in prison ministry to come to Knoxville to face their own personal tragedy.
I remember one time I was working the front desk and I saw someone in a wheelchair, and I just freaked out because I thought, that's Matthew.
Every face that came through the door morphed into the picture of Matthew.
Well, we knew nothing about the homeless people other than what we saw out of the corner of our eye. You'd see them and you just keep going. And then when our own son became homeless, homelessness changed. It wasn't the bum on the street anymore. You know, it was our child on the street now.
The Rosens have embraced KARM and the many people who walk through its doors.
Now being here for 5 years, we can see that plan and we can see it's good because we've seen so many lives change.
Wondering if they will ever see Matthew again.
Potentially one of them could be our son someday, but you know what? They're someone else's child.
And knowing that personal pain can sometimes lead to a greater life of sacrifice and service.
And it's the broken heart that makes the difference.
I want to read what you wrote about his travels, because it is pretty extraordinary the places that he went, and that you tracked him from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to LA, San Francisco, Seattle, Colorado, West Virginia, Boston, New York, Philly, and finally Fairbanks, Alaska.
Anchorage, I may have left that out of the post. He went to Anchorage, and then from Anchorage he went to Fairbanks.
And for people, there are many people who have dealt with your similar situation, where somebody is maybe suffering from some mental health challenges, but there is a destructive behavior within the family. I imagine in your work with Knox Area Rescue Ministries and Hold On to Hope and other charities that you've been a part of, it adds a layer of empathy for you.
It does. So part of the challenge of now sharing what has been God's amazing intervention in our life, that's all we can attribute it to. And if I were to tell you some of the things that would happen, as a friend of ours is fond of saying, you can't make this stuff up. Amazing things happened, and if we have a moment, I'll tell you one of those after a bit. But you realize, and we were talking to a family that we've worked with for the last couple of years through Hold On to Hope, and we were battling our own survival guilt. Their story didn't end like our story ended. In fact, they had searched for their son for 2 years, thinking that he was alive, and that's how we met them, because they thought maybe he had come to KARM, only to learn that he died of a drug overdose 5 days after he disappeared, and they had been searching for 2 years in vain. But if you go to, it's called NAMUS, which is the national database for 600,000 people are on that list, all listed as missing. About 40,000 John Does, they say, that are on there. And you realize that there's so many people out there who are in the exact same situation that we are. Missing loved one, no idea if they're dead or they're alive. And there are times when we said, we don't want Matthew to be deceased, but at least we'd know something. Carolyn used to refer to it as mourning the living. And that's exactly what it was. So while we're rejoicing in the miracle that we've experienced, we're mindful that that has not been the same for other people, and our heart goes out to them. And that's really why we started Hold On to Hope even before we found Matthew, because we know what it's like firsthand to have to contend with that on a day-to-day basis. And so yes, we empathize with so many that have not had the same experience. And we've also heard from a number of people just recently, in fact, a call this coming Thursday night with a family who does not live here, who's telling a similar story of their son, even though it's only been 2 years. They're looking for hope. They're looking for how to hold on.
How did you hold on?
Our faith in God. We had our moments, and one of the things about God, he's so faithful. Even when our faith wavers, he never wavers. But we had come to a place where in all of our looking, and then I'd love to share you with how this got started up again. But there's a passage in Scripture where it's Daniel, and there's the 5 words. And those 5 words became anchor points for us. When they said, I know my God is able to, and there's the 5 words, but even if he doesn't. We told ourselves, and we believed it, that if Matthew is alive, God can bring him back to us. But even if he doesn't, we're going to be okay. We have to move forward with our lives. We have to allow the rest of our family to move forward with their lives as well. We always hoped for an ending like this, but we had come to that place so that our hope would be placed in the right things, because what do you do, John, if the things that you hope for don't come to pass? It shatters you. And so we had to find a deeper anchor for our soul, something deeper than just Matthew's return, even though we would have given anything for that to happen. We had to come to grips with the fact that that might never happen. And then how do we go on living our lives? And for all of those years, my morning routine was to go through all those Google searches just to see if there was something that would turn his name up.
20 years.
Yeah, 24 actually. Up until just most recently when all of these things unfolded. But I mentioned a few minutes ago the couple, this is a family in York, Pennsylvania, whose son had died of a drug overdose 5 days after he disappeared. And so now we're going to York for the memorial service. It was a beautiful service, but, excuse me, on the way home, Carolyn's weepy, and she said, what if that's what happened to Matthew? What if he died years ago and we just don't know it, and we're searching all these years in vain for someone who's no longer alive? Well, that was the beginning of a series of things. But Carolyn was the impetus. She said, we've got to find out. Well, what are we going to do?
What followed were a series of breaks over about the next 2 years. Help from family, friends, and professionals, including current police officers, a private investigator, a random letter from the Seattle Housing Authority. That was a key clue. But it was a public record from Alaska that helped lead the Rosens to an address where they thought their son was living for about 4 years. So they planned a surprise trip 4,000 miles away from Knoxville to Fairbanks, Alaska.
And it all culminated with now this visit. But people were also giving us a lot of advice along the way, all well-meaning, but some more sound than others. Be careful when you go. You don't know what Matthew's going to be like. You don't know how he's going to respond when he comes to the door after 25 years. In fact, the private investigator had suggested that, number one, trespassing laws in Alaska, if he asks you to leave, you have to leave, and you should be prepared for that. You should also be prepared because if he sees you coming, he may not come to the door. Or he may step out onto the front porch, tell you he doesn't want to see you, just like we had heard from the police officer back then, and then you're going to be obligated to go. Well, we were all just a tad, maybe apprehensive. We never feared. But Carolyn said, I know my son. Matthew's not going to do any of that. And she was right. But we never had to find that out because of the story I told you about Matthew walking to his mailbox. And that's kind of all of these interventions along the way. Now, Matthew has been in touch with all of us every single day. He's texting his siblings. Carolyn and he exchanged good nights every single night. But there was another neat moment while we were there in Alaska, because we're still trying to figure out at this point, how did Matthew get to all of these different places when he only gets $500 a month for SSI? And so he was recounting to Carolyn yesterday that sometimes he would stay in a shelter, sometimes he would stay on the streets, and he would do whatever it is he had to do to make his $500 stretch. He would take buses, and the only time he ever flew was from the East Coast here down to Anchorage. And so that's how he managed to get by in all of this. But while we were there, our girls went home the day before. We stayed later, and so now they've all said their goodbyes to Matthew, and it's just Carolyn and me and Matthew. And so we were determined we were going to hang out together that day, but we said, why don't you let us take your bike and get it fixed for you? So he said, fine. So that next final morning, he was waiting for us. He had the bicycle outside in front. He was every day that we were there, he was eager. He couldn't wait for us to get there. And so now we load the bike into the back of the car, and he says, before we go, I need to say something. And it's like, okay, so what are you going to say? I didn't say that out loud, but certainly I had that thought. And he said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the pain, for all the hurt, all the heartache that I've caused you all. Will you forgive me? And you can't make that stuff up, like I said. And we said, of course we forgive you. And so we would go on to spend the rest of the day together. And we had a 3 a.m. flight, so we would eventually, after dinner, take him back to his place where we sat on his sofa, him in the middle, Carolyn and I on either side. We wrapped our arms around each other. We prayed with him and for him. And then we boarded our plane in the wee hours. We didn't get past the airport before we were already hearing from Matthew again. So now it's Mother's Day. And Carolyn says, I wonder if Matthew even remembers that it's Mother's Day. Because he had told us birthdays and some of those other things began to blur over the years. So we just decided to go air out a little bit and took a drive up into Townsend and let the top down on the car. And we're just taking a little drive. Now there's a 4-hour time difference. Mm-hmm. And so Carolyn's thinking, and she's saying it, I wonder if Matthew remembers that it's Mother's Day. A little after 2 p.m. our time, 10 a.m. his time, her phone rings. Hey, Mom. Happy Mother's Day. I love you, and I'm so glad we're reconnected. Well, you could just see the change in demeanor, everything happened. And so now Matthew has loaded Zoom onto his laptop. So we're Zooming, we're FaceTiming, we're having these face-to-face calls, and you can just see the glow on his face at how pleased he is to be found. So he's lived a life of solitaire, never married, no girlfriend, no relationships of any kind. He has just traveled around. The only real contact he's had in Fairbanks is for the people who deliver his groceries to his house. And he said, you're the first real human contact I've had in all of these years. While we were there, the place that we rented, this is the 2-bedroom with a living room, Carolyn cooked him a home-cooked meal. He said, that's the first home-cooked meal I've had since I left home. I never thought I'd have another one again. And Carolyn said, well, I never thought I'd be making you one again. And so it's the Happy Mother's Day call, and now every night, Carolyn will either call or text Matthew to say goodnight, and he will text or call back just saying, good night, Mom. Sweet dreams.
What's the lesson here, Burt?
I think there's a couple of them. One, why God chooses to bestow these kinds of results on someone, I don't know. But the power of hope, and the lesson is never give up hope. That's number one. Number two, God is sovereign. I believe that he knew everything that was happening all along, and that somehow in his perfect timing, he knew that we would find Matthew. He even orchestrated the moment that Matthew would be at that mailbox. And then the third lesson is for those who have mental health challenges, it's complicated. There's, you've seen the commercials where they hit the easy button. There's no easy button in all of this. But I would encourage people to persevere, to hold on to hope, but to hope in something greater than what you can muster yourself.
I want to ask you one more thing, and that is this picture that you sent me, in which you had a heart around An empty space in a family photo.
That family photo was taken by Sue Duncan, a local photographer here, in 2008. Matthew had already been missing for a couple of years. But as we talked about the hope of seeing Matthew again one day, she said, why don't we put that heart in the picture, the placeholder, where when you find, not if, but when you find Matthew, we will replace the heart with his picture. And so when we saw Matthew in Fairbanks, we took a picture, not thinking we were actually doing it for that, but then we realized perhaps we would be able to do that. And so we came back home, we went to the Photoshop store, gave them the digital picture, and then they inserted his picture in where the heart was. And we were joking about it because the age when we took the picture, Matthew's as old now as we were back then, and they said he's going to look like the dad, and but he doesn't. And so we're just thrilled to now see those two pictures side by side. And you know, the Bible talks about hope deferred makes the heart sick. The way it's worded in the Message, it says unrelenting disappointment, who can bear? Well, we have borne the unrelenting disappointment of search and nothing, and search and nothing, as so many other people have.
Fits and starts, hope and no hope.
Always. And then he said, but a good break can turn life around. See, we are living Proverbs 13:14. Unrelenting disappointment with a good break that literally turns life around. And I believe that that will turn life around for us and our family going forward. However many more years we got, it'll never be the same. But I want people to know, John, that we know what it's like to hurt. We empathize. And you have those moments where you even feel a little bit guilty. Why would this be our story? It's not everybody's story, and we realize that. And Carolyn and I and our family hurt for those that are still grieving, still looking, still searching, and we know many of them. But when all is said and done at the end of the day, if we did not believe in Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, if we did not believe that God was sovereign and that ultimately He controls it all, we never would have been able to make it. And then there's this one last piece. It actually occurs during the Last Supper. Mm-hmm. And this was so powerful for us. We've read that passage of Scripture untold times. And so now Jesus has taken off his outer garment. He fills a basin with water, and he's going around to each of the disciples, washing their feet until he gets to Peter. And Peter says, no, you're not going to do this. Wash it all of me. But Jesus did this, and I never saw this before. I'm picturing him kneeling down at the basin, looking up at Peter. And he said, Peter, you don't understand what I'm doing now, but one day you will. I don't know that we'll ever understand exactly what God was doing, why this would be our family's path to go. But I believe that God will say, let me explain to you something that you never understood before.